Welcome to another episode of the Listen and Learn series. In this episode, I'm going to address a question that I've heard come up in the past few weeks, and that question is, why are we all of a sudden talking about race? Aren't we post-racial? We've had a black president. We're all equal. There are opportunities for minorities. Why are we suddenly talking so much about race? Well, we know that a few weeks ago, George Floyd's life was taken away after Officer Chauvin kept his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And then as a result of that, there were protests that swept the nation as there were protests in over 20 other countries. So I would suggest that we never stop talking about race. It's always been something that we've talked about. But right now, it has been brought back to the forefront, and we're being forced to give it more attention, whether we want to or not. In the past few weeks, we've seen many companies come out and make public statements against racism, have zero tolerance policies instituted. We've seen many companies either elevate their D&I personnel or actually hire new D&I personnel. We've seen buildings' names change. We've seen monuments removed. We've seen slogans, mascots, and the like being changed. We've also seen terms of art now be removed. Now, some will say to that, is it really necessary? Is it necessary for the real estate arena to change the term that they use to describe the largest bedroom in the house from master suite? Is it necessary for schools to change chants or slogans that are now said to be racially motivated or biased? And to that, I would suggest yes. If one person finds offense in it, one consumer, one stakeholder, one employee, I would suggest that it does warrant a further look. And I don't think that the answer is, well, it's been that way for 100 years, so it should just be. When you know better, you do better. So we're getting to a place where we know better and we should do better. I would also suggest that the difference is how easily information can be transported from one place to another. If I look at about 20 years ago, the reality is we were limited to the access that we had to news. The news platforms were our source of information, and we were limited to what they chose to share with us. Now we all have access to Facebook Book Live. You're watching this YouTube video. We can make videos on our phone, and not only can we make these videos, we can share these videos with ease. And it's nothing for a video to go viral. And you can like it, you can comment on it, and you can make your voice be heard. And that is what's happening. So I don't think that we ever stop talking about race. As the global pandemic has swept our nation, a lot of us are now having more time to face these issues. And again, coupled with that, the death of George Floyd elevated these conversations again. So if you're not aware, there was a situation that happened in Central Park a few weeks ago, and a white female was out walking her dog, and a black male was in the park bird watching and asked her to please put her dog on the leash per the protocol in the park that said you could not have your dog not on a leash in that area. Her response to him was that she was going to call the police and let them know that an African American man was threatening her life. There's more context to it, but that video went viral, and as a result, she ended up losing her job. And then her employer, Franklin Templeton, came out and made a statement that said that they had a zero tolerance policy and did not tolerate racism in any way. So that's just one example. In the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, there has been many people across the country who have been terminated from their employment because of comments that they have chosen to make on social media. So either actions they've made, comments they've made, or videos that they've posted. And as a result, many employers have made comments that they do not tolerate racism in any way and have terminated the employment of those people. Race very much is something that has come up again, and it may seem like it's coming up again, but the reality is it's just given more attention right now because of the things that are happening around our country. So many of these things that are happening are causing us to listen. And then if at the video I recorded a few weeks ago, we know that what happened with NASCAR and Bubba Wallace and the attention that that has received with NASCAR saying that they would not allow the Confederate flag, and then Bubba Wallace then finding a noose in his NASCAR stall. So there are a lot of things that are happening that are causing us to talk more openly about race, more openly than the subtle discussions that have taken place. Even when we're talking about race, we all have something that's called an implicit bias or implicit biases, whether we want to have them or not. And they're not always bad. It's just these stereotypes that you may have or these preferences that you may have, and they're implicit so you don't know that you have them. So I'll ask you to do this. Take this quick little journey with me. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and I'm going to tell you a brief little story. So let's say that I was at work last week and I was having a discussion with one of my colleagues, and that colleague told me that her sibling was being released from prison, had been in prison for 5 years, and was being released because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that it was spreading through prison. So for safety purposes, those with good behavior were being released. So her sibling was released. That same afternoon, I had another colleague tell me, I know you've been going through a lot with your two small kids and the impact of COVID. So why don't you and your family take the weekend to go to my family's cabin and you can stay there for the week? No charge. You can just take it and that's my treat to you. So open your eyes. I didn't tell you in the story a gender or a race, but I will ask you, what was the gender and race of my coworker's sibling who was in jail? What was the gender and race? And I'll also ask you, what was the gender and race of my colleague who offered their cabin to my family for the weekend? Now, of course, you don't have to answer that, but subconsciously, we know that there are biases that we associate with different stories. So if on your own you thought that my coworker's sibling who was in prison was an African American male, you be in good company because that's what the media has told us. It has suggested to us that African American males are more likely to be incarcerated. So your implicit association and biases may have led you there. If you presume that my coworker who told me that I can use their cabin was a white male, you be in good company because that is the power of implicit biases. I would encourage you to look at the Harvard IAT website. There is a series of tests that you can take to determine whether or not you have an implicit bias or association against people for certain things. It is broad. It's on gender, race, religion. There's a lot. I would encourage you to take a look at that test. I would also encourage you to think about microaggressions. And I will say this, there is a lot that companies are doing now with the diversity and inclusion space. And I've heard many people say the diversity and inclusion I don't feel applies to me because while my job has tried to do its work in the diversity space, I don't feel included for one reason or another. So I would encourage you to, as we even talk about why are we talking about race, think about your very own job. What is your job doing about diversity and inclusion? How do we know? What's the measure to determine if those diverse people at the organization actually feel included? So I'll give you an example. We see this happen oftentimes in the work setting, whether we know it or not. And one of the examples that is common is the names on resumes. There are studies out there that suggest that ethnic sounding names do not get the same level of callbacks. So if my name is Latoya or if my name is LaQuisha, the suggestion is that LaQuisha is an ethnic name and that LaQuisha Jenkins may not get the same level of callbacks as a Lauren Brown or a Lauren Smith or a Karen Smith, for example. And that is something that has been studied and tested. And it's not just the ethnic sounding name, but also the female names. So the idea is you also know that Latoya or Karen, that those are female names. So the suggestion is that if you had a neutral name like Erin, that maybe you would have a higher chance of receiving a callback for a job if there may be an implicit bias against women, for example. There's also another example in the legal field where it was a brief that was written, and the only thing that was changed on the brief was the name of the author. So some of the partners who were critiquing the brief were told that the brief was written by a white associate versus a black associate. Same exact brief, got different ratings and different markups. The brief that purportedly was for the African American law associate was given lower ratings. That person, they found more writing and grammatical errors in that same brief. And I would suggest that those are things that are related to implicit biases. those are the kind of implicit, very implicit biases that we have and stereotypes and associations that we make for people, things, and situations. Often with this discussion also comes up microaggressions. If you're not familiar with those, I would encourage you to research or look up microaggressions. For example, the question of where are you from? That question being asked to someone of Asian or African descent, and that question is suggesting that they can't possibly be from America. So that where are you from question, or you speak so well. You think it's a compliment, but that suggestion, depending on who you're telling it to, may suggest that people who look like you typically don't speak well. So I have to compliment you and say you speak well. Or if you're walking down the street and there's an African American male approaching you and you switch sides of the street, or you clutch your purse a little bit tighter, or you tell someone who tells you that they're gay, you don't look gay. Those are all very small examples of microaggressions, but microaggressions, in fact, can send a big message and have impact. Procter & Gamble came out with a really good video recently. I'm going to put the link to it at the end of this video and as well in the comments. And I would encourage you to take a second to watch it. So in a nutshell, I just wanted to come in and take some time to explain why we're talking about race right now. It might seem like we stopped talking about it for a while and then all of a sudden it came back, but I would suggest to you that we never stop talking about race. It just might be that you're now listening, whether it's forced or not, but we never stop talking about race. As always, thank you for watching. As a reminder, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you're notified when I post the next video. I also ask that you like and share this video if you are enjoying the content. Until next time, I encourage you to continue to be bold. Have a great day.